The colonial Quakers are well known for possessing a theology that, for their time period, was relatively progressive. Their theology was rooted in the now well accepted idea that people, regardless of race, are equal. This led to the Quakers being involved in a lot of countercultural movements throughout the colonial times. Notably, they sought the humane treatment of prisoners, the mentally ill, were pacifists, and sought equal rights for women. However, in regard to Quaker involvement in the abolition movement, there has been a substantial discourse amongst historians over the impact that Quakers had on the movement and their motivations for participating. For an overview of the published literature, look at J. William Frost's article, The Origins of Quaker Crusade Against Slavery. Depending on which historian you read, Quakers participated in the abolitionist movement because it was politically or economically expedient for them. For further insight into this perspective, look at Darrell D. Wax's article, Quaker Merchants in the Slave Trade in Colonial Pennsylvania. In this article, Wax argues that Quaker merchants did not participate more in the slave trade because it wasn't profitable for them to import slaves into Pennsylvania. And that's their only real issue. There wasn't some big moral qualm that they had with it. However, there is a lot of scholarship that describes the Quaker movement as being heavily involved in the abolitionist movement. For example, Wayne J. Everly's thesis, The Pennsylvania Abolition Society from 1755 to 1840, explained how the Quakers were heavily involved in the Pennsylvania Abolitionist Society, and they were the most active members. And again, in Nancy Slocum Hornick's thesis, 18th Century Social Critic, Educator, and Abolitionist, she presents the viewpoint that I now possess after having conducted this research, that while there was a lot more participation in the abolitionist movement from Quakers as opposed to other denominations, the vast majority of the work was still accomplished by a handful of people. And the two most renowned Quaker abolitionist leaders are John Woolman and Anthony Benezet. And they're the most well known because they produce the most, and depending on who you ask, best quality literature on the subject. But Hornick described Benezet as, quote unquote, the first person to define the problem of slavery in its full dimensions, the first to pinpoint the enormous significance of race prejudice in the social system, and the role of acquisitive greed in the economic structure underlying it, the first to propose a plan for integrated gradual emancipation, the first to explore certain political pressure tactics for the abolition, and finally, the first to synthesize and article the full range of religious and natural rights arguments against the system. The impact that Quakers had on the abolitionist movement was large. In the early phase of the abolitionist movement, before the Revolutionary War, they were the predominant participatory denomination. In the southern colonies, there was essentially no abolitionist movements apart from the ones the Quakers had. Also in the South, Quakers would periodically free all the slaves they had, individual Quakers, that is. And then those Quakers would be viewed as threats to the society they were living in, where they would then be forced to leave, to adapt to slavery, or to remain silent on the issue. The early Quakers participated in the abolitionist movement because of a worldview that would not be widely accepted into American law until after the Civil War, and in reality much longer. The theological understanding that all people are made equal equipped the Quakers to participate in the abolitionist movement in a manner that the other denominations could not have. Thank you.